And a very good day. How are you, ladies and gentlemen? Great. Going to talk about the Suez Canal. Now, how many here have not gone through the canal? How many have gone through, but not in the last couple of years? They have expanded the canal. It's actually part of the way. It's a two-way canal now. So it's very interesting. I'll show you photos of that in a moment. It is a fascinating, fascinating story when you go through this. Now, you got to look at this canal we're looking at, 19th century, connected the Red Sea with the area of the Mediterranean. Now, you had the recent addition added, and that was done in 2015, 2 years ahead of schedule. It was a 3-year project. They were literally able to get it done in 1 year. There is a little delay in some aspects, and that is the tunnels. There's 5 tunnels going underneath the canals now, and they have just got the boring done. They don't think they'll have them open to traffic until the end of this year. They were supposed to be open 2017, so they're a little behind on the tunnels itself. But going through, I'll give you a little bit of history. If you look at the Panama Canal, the first ones who thought about that were the conquistadors back in that time. But you have to look at the Suez Canal, because this has been a canal since BC. So it's very interesting. You had the Isthmus of Egypt being so narrow. A canal was thought about in the days of the pharaohs. Actually, in the reign of the pharaohs, they did construct different canals. Now, these canals didn't run exactly the way that we're used to. You have here the southern section of the canal will go through. They do think that went part through. What happens, we pass what's called the Bitter Lakes. Now, in the Bitter Lakes, when they dredged them, they actually found deep, deep shells, and these were seashells. So they think the Red Sea actually came up much farther than it does today. So therefore, they were able to connect this part of the Red Sea with the Nile, and then take that right up to the Mediterranean. So it didn't exist the way you're going to see it today, but back in the time of the pharaohs, you did have these ancient canals. You have Winnie the Elder. He lived during the 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. That's 2407 to 2260 BC. He not only tells the story of these canals, he explains the reasoning actually for their construction. They were moving warships and moving stones for all their monuments going through the canal. It was Thutmose III. He's credited with constructing the first major canal, and that's 1500 BC. City I also credited with constructing another canal, 1310 BC. You have an inscription from Ramses II, that was 1279 to 1212 BC. He claimed that he either finished or he actually repaired a canal leading from the Nile to the Red Sea, and that was via Wadi Tulmat and through the Bitter Lakes. Now, sometime in the next 600 years, this came silted up. You have no recording writings concerning the canal until the time period of Nekau II, 609 to 594 BC. He depicts him re-excavating the canal that was done earlier. Now, Darius the First, 510 BC, is credited with building the next canal excavation. This canal, from the area of 510 BC, operated for 200 years. Now, that was up to the time of Cleopatra. At the time of Cleopatra, it became silted again and was filled with silt. You had Roman emperor, and that was Hadrian, about 17 AD. He ordered the canal re-excavated, and soon the canal fell back into disrepair. When Amrim el-As conquered Egypt, 640 AD, he oversaw the restoration of Darius I canal. Now, you have documentation that says this canal lasted all the way into the 8th century. You had the English scholar, and that was the Dicul. He recorded that the monk Fidelis sailed through the Nile to the Red Sea whilst on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Now, the main purpose of this canal was to ship grain to Arabia. Now, you did have in 767 the Caliphate, and that was Al-Mansur. He filled in the canal. He did this as a punishment. He wanted to starve the rebels that were in Medina, so he had the canal completely filled. You had the late 1700s, Napoleon Bonaparte. He conducted an expedition into Egypt, and the concept of constructing a canal was once again through the isthmus that way. He wanted to do it. He wanted to do it because it would be under the control of the French. And this would be, he would thought how great it would be for the French to have control. It would create a huge problem for the British. They would either have to pay duties to France or continue sending goods overland all the way to South Africa. Now, the canal studies that began in 1799, there was a miscalculation. They did not think it wasn't even with the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and therefore here, they thought it was about 30-foot difference. The canal seemed unreasonable at that time, unfeasible. It was canceled. Now, Napoleon's misreading of the sea levels wasn't discovered back until 1840s, and by 1854, Ferdinand de Lesseps, the former French consul to Cairo, he secured an agreement. He did it with a gentleman called Sayyid Pasha, the viceroy of Egypt. They were going to construct the canal 170.5 kilometers or 106 miles right across the Isthmus of Suez. Now, Lesseps, he later on went to do the Panama Canal, unfortunately unsuccessfully at that time. Now, you did have the British. They were very much opposed to the aspect of a canal being done. Lord Palmerston opposed the construction. Palmerston sent the following cable to Lesseps. I must tell you frankly that what we are afraid of is losing our commercial and maritime preeminence, for this canal will put other nations on an equal footing with us. This did nothing to slow the concept of the canal. 1856, the Universal Suez Ship Canal Company, owned by French and Egyptian interests, were formed. It granted the rights to the operation of the canal for 99 years after completion. After the period of 99 years, the Egyptian government would take over control of the entire canal. Construction began April 25th, 1859. Now, during the initial phase, you did have this done with the most rudimentary tools. It was digging by hand. You had picks. You didn't have any steam aspects in that way. So it was a hard, laborious, and you'll feel the heat and went way up on deck. Eventually, though, they did bring in European workers. They brought in steam shovels, labor disputes, and you also had a cholera epidemic that slowed the construction. It wasn't completed for another 10 years. On November 17th, 1869, the canal finally opened to navigation. It was 4 years behind schedule, a cost of over $100 million US. Although the inauguration was a rather elaborate affair, French Empress Eugene, the wife of Napoleon III, attended. Unfortunately, Sayyid Pasha, the one who signed the contract, he passed away. He never got to see the canal open. But in 1863, he was succeeded by his nephew, and he was called Ismail Pasha. Now, we're going to go through two cities, one in the middle, and that is the aspect of Ismail. And as we get to the Mediterranean, we're going to go through Said. These two cities are named for the Pashas. So you have Ismail, we'll go into in the middle, and then Said at the very end. Now, the port city Said, that's right on the mouth of the Canal of the Mediterranean. Now, almost right after its opening, the Suez Canal created a big impact on world trade. You had goods being moved in record time. Now, that, very interestingly, about the area 1875, Egypt almost went completely bankrupt. And what happens, Ismail Pasha, he also lost his fortune. And what happened, Ismail Pasha, he decided to regain his money. He would sell his shares in the Suez Canal for £4 million sterling. Now, British Prime Minister, and that was Benjamin Disraeli, he received the news about the aspect of Ismail wanting to sell his shares. The Prime Minister just tried to outmaneuver the French. He knew the French would be the first to offer the money. Now, time was the essence, so he had no time to waste it that way. He didn't want to go through parliamentary aspects, knowing it would take months. So when the Prime Minister dispatched his private secretary, and that was Montague Corey, to the House of Lords Rothschild for a loan. Now, according to Corey's writings, when he told the Prime Minister wanted £4 million sterling by the next day, Rothschild popped a grape into his mouth and inquired, "What's your security?" "The British government," said Corey. "You shall have it." And he was given the monies. Now, it was 7 years later, in 1882, that Britain invaded Egypt, beginning a long occupation of the country. Now, in 1888, you did have a convention international that made the canal available to all ships of any nation be able to come through the canal. You had the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty of 1936. Egypt, with this, became virtually independent, but Britain did retain the rights to maintain military forces in the Suez Canal and also to control both entry points of the canal. Now, after World War II, Egypt pressed for removal of all British troops from the canal zone. Now, the creation of Israel in 1948, the Egyptian government prohibited any ships by coming or going to or from Israel. 1954, Egypt and the UK signed a 7-year contract. It resulted in the withdrawal of all British forces from the Canal Zone, and it also allowed Egypt to take control of all the former British installations. Now, in the 1950s, you did have the government that was by Nasser. He began working on a way to finance a dam. This was called the Aswan High Dam. Nasser, he was convinced that building this dam would expand greatly all the arable lands within Egypt, also the industrialization with new electricity and all different things coming in. This dam was going to reinvent the country. Now, initially, Egypt and Nasser had support both the United States and the United Kingdom for the construction of the dam, but in July of 1956, both nations withdrew their support for the construction of the high dam. President Eisenhower in 1956 in July went as far as he actually canceled a promised grant of 56 million US dollars. Now, this was a big concern of the ever-growing friendship between Egypt and the Soviet Union. Now, the Egyptian government was to swiftly seize and nationalize the canal. Now, they would take the passage fees from any ships then and would use that to finance the dam. But he did turn around, Nasser, and said he would give the shareholders, the British and also the French, fair treatment in their shares. Now, Israel then invaded Egypt, led by Moshe Dayan, October 29, 1956. They felt that the Colonel Nasser's government threatened the continued existence of the independent state of Israel, and also Israel believed that they couldn't afford to wait for other countries to curb the expansionist of Nasser and his policies. October 30th, 1956, President Eisenhower announced he was suspending all aid to Israel, and that was in response to the invasion of Egypt. 2 days after Israel's invasion, Britain and France bombarded the Egyptian air bases along the canal. On November 9th, 1956, British and French troops landed in Port Said, and this was to stop all the hostilities, also be able to enforce safe passage for vessels going through the canal. It's now known that late in October 1956, secret discussions were actually carried out in Paris about this on the possibility of an invasion on Egypt between British, French, and Israelis. This was secret talks produced what's called the Suez Protocol. It was signed on behalf of British Foreign Secretary Selwyn Lloyd, Christian Pennois of France, and David Ben-Gurion of Israel. Now, you have British Prime Minister, actually, Eden quoted as informing Edwin Heath, Israel has agreed to invade Egypt. We shall then send in our own forces backed up by the French to separate the contestants and then regain control of the canal. Now, in retaliation for this invasion, Egypt, they blocked the canal. And how they blocked it, they sank 40 ships within the canal itself, stopping any vessels coming through. Now, under pressure from the United States, the Soviet Union, and also the United Nations, Britain and France, they withdrew their forces in December of 1956. Israel, they kept their forces in until March of 1957. They were replaced by UN troops to come in to keep patrol on the Egyptian frontier. A further act of retaliation, that way Nasser also urged all Arab nations to reduce oil exports to Western Europe. You had a big rationing of gasoline in Western Europe at that time. The Suez Canal was then reopened later the same month. Egypt then took out all the intentionally sunk vessels. They raised them up. 1962, you had Egypt making its final payments for the canal to the original owners. Once again, that was the Universal Suez Ship Canal Company. Nation of Egypt finally owned and was able to take full control of the Suez Canal. Now, you had in 1967, Egypt once again ceasing operations of the canal, and this was following the Six-Day War with Israel and the occupation of the Sinai Peninsula. For the next 8 years, the Suez Canal, that separates Sinai from the rest of Egypt, existed as the front line between Egypt and Israeli armies. So you had 8 years of a stalemate here. The year 1973, Yom Kippur War, further bombing destroyed the city of Port Said. It was almost leveled. Then in 1975, you had the Egyptian president, Anwar el-Sadat. He reopened the Suez Canal, and this was a gesture of peace after talks with Israel. Now, what you do have here in 2014, as I mentioned, the new canal. 3-year project, 24 miles, 40 kilometers. It parallels to the old canal. And with the aspect that way from the Bitter Lakes to El Bala, you have actually 45 miles of waterway cut, 72 kilometers. As I mentioned, 3-year time allotment actually done that way and actually done on the budget, $8.2 billion. Now, it was overseen by the Egyptian army. You had 400 companies, 25,000 workers. coming in and doing the work. Now, it is said that anywhere from 250 to 280 million tons of sand were actually moved during this. It opened on August 7th, 2015. It's expected to take, as I said, 2018 for the tunnels to be completed. These are that way. You have inland from Port Said, about 17 kilometers are 3 of the tunnels, 2 road tunnels, 1 railway tunnel. What happens now is the old railway bridge does not work. So they have no rail over. And what happens is, I'm going to show you in photos many ferries. Most of these ferries can only take cars. They can't take loaded trucks. So by Port Said, to cross the canal, some companies have their trucks waiting up to 3 days for ferries that can take trucks across. That's how crowded it is, because they do not have the aspect, and some of the hazardous material cannot go across the new aluminum bridge. So very interesting as you go through here. So you're going to have altogether 5 tunnels, 4 for cars, 1 for trains. Now, there are only 2 bridges spanning the entire aspect of Suez Canal. One is the old railway swing bridge you'll see closed. Now, this used to be open 9 o'clock in the morning. Traffic would stop until the trains went through, and 9 p.m. They would close the bridge, go right across, trains would go, and then they open it right back up. Now, it is redundant. You have here the railway tunnel, as I said, coming through. The other span is the aluminum bridge, constructed in 2005. It's done by actually the Japanese. It's called the Mubarak Peace Bridge, or the Japanese-Egyptian Friendship Bridge, and it is constructed of aluminum. It has a 40-ton weight limit per vehicle, so they have the heavy materials can't go across that. Now, when you come through on the African side, now remember, as you're going through, Africa on your left, Asia on your right. We're going through the separation port. Now, as you go through the separation point, you're going to see all these little pontoons. These are pontoon bridges. And what happens, they hook up little outboard engines basically to them, and they can maneuver them, and they can make a bridge across in minutes. So there are the safety factors, and this is done by the military. You'll see those. So they have about, I think 20 minutes is a normal time from operation to go through. There's also 3 military monuments as you go across. 2 are near Ismailia, 1 further forth. 2 are for the Yom Kippur War. 1 is for World War I. Now, you also have here a very interesting thing they just opened up and put into place. There's 2 very nice little statues as you're coming through. One is basically an old pharaoh, and then you have modern, and these are for the canal workers, and these have just recently been put in. And they have here, you're going to look like a little boat on the left-hand side. That is the new Canal Operations Center, and they actually built it that looked like a vessel coming through. So it's very interesting. You'll be able to see this, but one thing I'm going to warn you about, we'll be moving at a decent speed. Therefore, you're going to have a breeze coming across the deck. Be careful outside. Plenty of water, head coverings. You will not feel the heat with the wind coming across the deck. So you won't realize how much sun you're taking, how much heat you're actually experiencing in that way. Now, one thing very interesting, the Statue of Liberty. That was designed to be Egypt carrying the light to Asia. It was supposed to be at Port Said. What happens is, when the French were making that, they told Egypt how much it would cost for the pedestal. And they would have to make the pedestal. They'd have to do a lot of millions of dollars of work. Egypt refused it. So then it was offered to the United States because construction had already started. So the Statue of Liberty, if you go into New York and you look at the robes and you look at the way, that was Egypt carrying the light to Asia. So it's very interesting. You have 60 ships averaging a day going through the canal, over 300 million tons of goods a year. Now, when the canal first opened, very interesting, it was only 7.6 meters or 25 feet deep. You're looking at 22.8 meters or 72 feet wide, and only about, that went 72 feet deep, I'm sorry, and about 200 to 300 feet wide. So it was very, very small when it first opened up in the end of the 1800s. The only less than 500 ships used it over its first year. So it's much busier now. You have, because of the building of the new Panama Canal, they increased the fees in Panama greatly. So you now have more ships utilizing the Suez because the price is less. and you have Mertz, you have all the different freight companies. A lot of them have put more vessels running in this route than crossing over into the area of Panama. So here are just a little bit of distances in that way. From Jeddah to Piraeus, you save 9,887 nautical miles. Colombo to New York, traveling, 5,473 miles. Singapore to New York, 2,373 miles. Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia to Rotterdam, 4,733. Tokyo to Rotterdam, 3,315. So you can see how much of a savings this was. And you can remember years ago with vessels, you didn't have the speed you had today. So you're talking a great amount of time. So here we are coming through. You can see here we'll be coming out of the area of Jordan, Aqaba, coming down. So here is the canals. Starting at the bottom, coming up with the Bitter Lakes. Now we're coming in. You'll see little vessels, people out fishing. Little sailing. I like this one. They had it down great. Just tie up and have the family out for a picnic. One of the yachts coming through. Now here we're coming at New Canal. The old canal is on the left-hand side as you're looking at the screen. The new canal is on the right. Once again, it starts at the Bitter Lakes. So we're in the Bitter Lakes now. Once again, in the Bitter Lakes, now have the aspect when they did the excavations, finding very, very large and very heavy concentrations of shells. So they know it was probably, I should say, no, they think it definitely was part of the Red Sea at a time. So here we're coming in. So this is all recent. We're in right now, recently dredged. There's part of the pontoon bridges I told you about. You can hear this is taken, matter of fact, this was last year. They're still doing work on the top, moving the sand. They have all these little cutways through so the vessels and pilots can move back and forth. And what's very interesting here, you're going to see more and more construction taking place on the side of Asia. Now we're coming up. This here, you look there to the left, it looks like a boat. That is the canal zone operations. And then here are the monuments to the canal workers. Both sides. For the pharaohs when they first started it, to the men who just recently dug it. You're going to see many mosques. More in the military bridges. Now this is very interesting. Pigeon meat is a very big meat in Egypt. And what happens is they raise the pigeons. How you raise a pigeon is you build them a little pigeon coop. Those towers. There's all holes inside. The pigeons go in the roost. You want your meal, you just go up, grab one of the pigeons, boom. And pastil. Pastil is Egyptian. It's also, you'll find it in Tunisia. It's dark pigeon meat with raisins, done in a puff pastry with a little bit of powdered sugar on it. It's absolutely delicious. So you're going to see these little military operation posts, and I look at many of those, and I look at these little single ones going, what did you do wrong to get stationed here? You'll see some of the irrigation canals coming out. These are the ferries that operate back and forth. And you can see they can't put the large trucks on them. And here you do normally have the military flying over. More of the bridges. Now there's those little engines I told you. The little on the side, the yellow. They're basically like outboards. And they hook them up to it and they can move them. And they just move them right across. Another one of the military posts. Here's the monument for World War I. Be on your left-hand side. Coming up to the area Ishmael. Now here's we're going to change pilots. I'll be narrating. I'll tell you which side they're coming up. And what they do is they'll be communicating, either the Commodore or the staff captain communicates to the pilot boat. They get a set speed. And once they have this set speed, they then come along at that speed, the vessel doing one thing, the other pilot boat doing exactly the same. Rope ladder comes down. They exchange the pilots coming through. And then here, one of the military ships. More of the outposts. You have the dredgers. You'll see the dredgers all throughout. They're always constantly doing work. This is the first of the Yom Kippur. It is a bayonet, Klishnikov rifle bayonet. That is a small museum. That'll be on the starboard side. Now at Ishmael, there's a Welcome to Egypt sign. More of the ferries. Now this I always really enjoy. There is a church and mosque, and I've noticed this back in 1986, the first time coming through. You have a mosque and a church side by side. Now this is the railroad swing bridge built by the Germans, no longer in operation. Now how would you like to have that job? You have to have somebody didn't like what you said or something that way. He is there just in a lone position. But once again, this used to swing closed, 9 in the morning and 9 at night. The trains would go across, they'd open it back up. Now there's no train crossing at all. This is the pontoons. You can see how they're laid out here. You can see how they're individual little pieces put together. Then they put them together, put the engines on them. Once again, 20 minutes. They can have that deployed and have a road across the canal. This is the second Yom Kippur. The tanks. And here, this is the bridge built by the Japanese, 2005. You can see the two flags. And then here, we're getting to more populous areas, so you'll see a lot more ferries, more pigeon farming. That gives you a little bit more of an idea. You can see all the different holes where the pigeons will live in. Now you're back with the boats coming in. Now you can see we're coming towards the end of the canal. That's where the tidal flow really goes. In the center of the canal, there's not much tide, but you can see here the current. Another one of the dredgers, irrigation canals. Now we're coming up to Port Said. So you'll start seeing the cities. And then here are the cranes. Now what happens is you have feeder boats. Now what happens is you might have something sailing through the Mediterranean. They'll come up, they'll drop off cargo here, and then a boat might come in from the other side, coming in from Red Sea, pick it up, and then bring it. So these are both sides of the canal with little feeder ports in that way. Pilot coming off. And then here, more of the ports. And that is in the distance, Port Said. And ladies and gentlemen, once we pass that and that pilot's off, that's the Mediterranean. So you're going to be going from the area Red Sea to the Mediterranean. Once again, on your right-hand side is Asia. On your left-hand side is Africa. So you're going to be coming through, and then we'll have that way a day more, and then we start in a very intensive part of the voyage, and that is through the Mediterranean. Many ports back to back. It's going to be an exhausting, so enjoy these days going through the canal and relaxing, because you're going to need that energy once we get to the Med. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the Suez Canal. Once again, I'll be narrating from the bridge. We don't know the exact times. It could even be the day early or day later. So we will find out. The Commodore will let you know. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a great day.